All right, folks. Big Paul here today with Mr. Kurt Havens. Kurt, we haven't done a YouTube video in a while.
Nope.
We've
been doing a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, we've been busy working on the Anabolics e-course, the science of Anabolics. So shameless plug here. If you want to learn all the science behind performance-enhancing drugs and anabolics, we have the e-course up. There is a free preview of it. I think I have about 2 hours worth of free content if you want to check it out before you decide whether or not you want to purchase. It's at my website, anabolicbodybuilding.com. There's a link below if you want to check it out.
What, almost 100 videos on there now?
I don't know, a lot. There's a lot on there. But we're continuing to add stuff. Hopefully, we will make this the best science-based resource on anabolics that you can find on the internet. None of the BS. Hopefully, you'll find a lot of value in it. Anyway, today we want to talk about fat loss myths. I have gotten asked some really stupid questions about fat loss recently. This is the season for fat loss. And there's a bunch of stuff that I see people still believe in, and that's just not true. And I don't know how this stuff continues to be bandied about amongst people, but there's a lot of junk. I answered a bunch of questions this weekend from some friends about fat loss, and it made me think I should probably clear some of this stuff up. We can talk about it. So let's talk about some fat loss myths, Kurt.
I think so, in people's defense, I think the internet's what's causing it, right? Like when you and I were younger, when there was no internet, if you wanted to know the answers to these things, you read a book.
Yeah.
Right? There was a lot less garbage published back then.
Well, a lot of it is charlatans that are trying to sell you a fat loss program, and people love a good gimmick or shortcut. So if they think that there's some magic way that they can lose weight without having to work as hard, that sounds very attractive. So it is the old snake oil salesman tactic that has been around forever. Something sounds too good to be true. It probably is. So let's start off here. This is one that's probably going to upset some people. Keto is superior for fat loss. I hear that one all the time. I lost a ton of weight on keto, and I couldn't lose weight with any other diets.
Okay. So, I mean, just like anything else, it's going to come down to calories in, calories out. I think that the most noticeable thing that people see when they enter some sort of state of ketosis is that there's an amount of water that drops out initially.
Yep.
So they see this immediate weight loss that gratifies them. And they probably immediately look slightly better in the mirror. Their clothes are probably slightly looser. And then it kind of just perpetuates this thing on. There's no actual reason per se, though, why ketosis is like the emergency generator of the human body. It's not a state that your body's supposed to be running in. It's not ideal. That's why it changes the pH, your respiration. And it's not needed. You don't need to remove carbohydrates in general to lose body fat. That's not necessarily the way that the human body works.
And one would argue it's probably counterproductive if you like having muscle on you.
I'm feeling good.
Yeah, and feeling good.
I mean, some of the energy you gain, you do, because people argue that they have a sense of energy from being in ketosis. So that's basically a stress response. It's your body's way of telling you to go find some more food.
I have my theory on why people like keto so much and why it works so well for people. One, there's the psychological effect. When you first start the diet, as you mentioned, you're going to have a huge drop in water because you're going to become glycogen depleted. You'll see people lose these huge amount of weight, like 6, 7, 8 pounds in a week. And we can do the math on that. That's not fat. There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. If you lost 10 pounds of weight in a week, that's 35,000 calories. You did not metabolize 35,000 calories.
And that's that's like in a vacuum.
Yeah.
That's just pure fat loss, which doesn't ever really occur.
Right. You didn't lose that much fat in a week. I think people confuse weight loss with fat loss, but you get this psychological kick, from the beginning. You see some, like you said, you see some success. The other part of it is, if you think about it, if you remove carbohydrates from your diet, you essentially limit your choices on shitty food you can eat.
Yeah. Most of processed food is a mix of carbohydrates and fat. So
correct. You're not going to have ice cream. You're not going to have potato chips. You're not going to have French fries. You're not going to have cheeseburgers. I mean, all that stuff, pastries, cakes, cookies, all that stuff goes away. So it's a dummy-proof way of creating a calorie deficit without having to think about it. You're removing all those trash foods from your diet. And it's probably, for somebody who's not a bodybuilder, it could be an effective way to lose weight. I just find it impossible to stick to a keto diet. And it eventually makes you feel like trash. And I've never seen anybody that can do it long term.
For me, it actually becomes difficult for me to keep a calorie deficit. I've tried all of these diets on purpose just so I could speak to them more accurately.
So have I.
And I find it difficult to stay in a calorie deficit when I eat, because fat is 9 calories per gram. It becomes very difficult for me to eat an adequate amount of food without overeating food. And you don't realize it because dietary fat doesn't have the same effect on the brain that carbohydrates do. So leptin doesn't really respond to it the same way. You have satiety in your stomach because it sits in your stomach longer, but your brain doesn't recognize it the same way. So you still, you might still be hungry. You tend to eat a little more. It's very hard to eat like an omelet with cheese and lose weight, in my opinion.
Right.
Unless you're someone who's eating an incredible amount of food or you're severely overweight. Right. I mean, you and I both eat much more food than the average person.
Yep.
And I couldn't maintain a calorie deficit doing that. It's much easier for me to lower the fat.
Usually what I see is people get that quick initial fat loss and then they don't lose anything else.
And then your muscles feel like garbage if you lift.
Yeah. And brain fog. And I don't think everybody talks about doing keto, but I think very few people are actually in ketosis.
Yeah.
Right. Because I forget what the ratio, but the majority of your calories have to come from fat, I believe, to be fully in ketosis.
Well, the method that's used in a hospital for epileptic seizures is 80 to 90% fat. It's like disgusting.
Yeah.
It's almost pure fat.
And ask any cardiologist what they think of a keto diet.
Most would disagree with it, I would think. I'm sure someone's going to find some doctor on the internet now that somehow agrees with this stuff.
There's always exceptions to everything. All right, next one. My God, I've been asked this one so much lately, Kurt. It makes me want to bash my head against the wall. People ask me what do I think of Ozempic for fat burning?
Well, the problem is it doesn't, as a drug, it's not actually interacting that way with the body or burning fat directly. It's the easiest way to explain is it's interacting with the brain directly. It's creating a sense of fullness, and it does improve the way your pancreas works, but it's not necessarily burning fat directly. So it's like a fullness drug. It's not a fat loss drug, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for what I understand, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but it increases leptin sensitivity, correct?
Yeah.
I think that's the mechanism, and suppresses ghrelin to a certain degree. So it's just hunger hormone signaling. It's changing. Yeah. It's basically self-control in a pen.
Yeah. So, but again, my issue with it, and I think there's value to a lot of drugs. I don't have a problem with Ozempic or Wegovy, whatever, semaglutide. I think the issue becomes if self-control is the issue, perhaps we need to address the self-control issue some way instead of using drug for it. That's my only problem. I don't think it's
usually when I see people that have self-control issues, I mean, there are rare instances where I do think people have dysfunctional hunger hormone signaling. It's some severely obese people, but I think most of the time when you see people that are binge eating or eating, just really crappy diets, a lot of times it's more of a psychological issue than it is an actual hormone issue. People are emotional eating and doing things like, it's an addiction essentially. I've been there myself before.
Yeah, when you get a rush from food, right? I mean, something that you taught me a while ago is when we incorporate a cheat meal, like a full-on garbage cheat meal. One, there needs boundaries on it, right? The calorie size of that. And the other thing is the timing of it, which I thought was fascinating, is we do it at night before bed because it becomes this dopamine hedonistic thing. If you, like anyone who's ever gone that eats relatively healthy, if you go and you have a pancake breakfast, the rest of your day, you're seeking garbage.
Yep.
And you have no desire to eat things like chicken rice at all for the rest of the day. And you feel high. Like I actually feel like, I've just done drugs when you eat food like that, when you're not used to eating food like that.
Yep. That's usually what ends up happening. I call it the fuck it mode. You have a shitty breakfast, and then the rest of the day is just in the garbage pail.
Yep. Yeah. So I think, but again, like I think there's definitely disordered eating out there, and it is an issue. I'm not saying it's not. And I think it is a real problem. I think as a nation, I think we have a big problem with overeating and the quality of our food. I don't necessarily think using pharmaceutical drugs per se is the answer, though.
I would say for most of our audience, which are fitness enthusiasts and bodybuilders, most of these people don't have self-control issues. So Ozempic is probably not a good choice. I would say, like I get asked, that's the housewife question I get asked, can Ozempic help me lose weight? And I'm like, have you tried working out? Have you tried eating cleaner first? Most of them haven't even done that.
No.
So start there first. All right, here's the next one I hear all the time. Intermittent fasting is superior for fat loss. You hear all these success stories about intermittent fasting and fat loss.
Well, I think we should clear up what intermittent fasting. First of all, skipping breakfast is not intermittent fasting. That's just laziness. I would say there are studies to show different outcomes, right? I've read studies where the fasting group supposedly lost more weight. That doesn't necessarily mean that as a whole that's going to be the solution. It's similar to ketosis or any diet where you remove a whole part of your nutrition. If you've limited the window in which you eat, most likely you're going to eat less, unless you're hedonistic and you fill that window with food. It becomes very difficult to overeat if you're only eating for 6 or 8 hours for most people. I can easily overeat in 8 hours. Again, another thing that I've messed around with just to try, I found it near impossible to gain any muscle. I'd lost no more fat. I didn't feel very good. I tend to go hypoglycemic. My blood sugar was a mess in the morning. It became, then when you cut off at night, it became difficult to sleep. I really found no benefit. I think it's a valid tool, though. If someone's really struggling with this, it's a tool in a drawer. If you need to use something like this to control your eating, why not? Is it an ideal way? No. And there is no magic that talk about apostasy, cell death that occurs. Actually, exercise is what causes most cell rejuvenation, not so much not eating.
Autophagy, right?
Yeah, autophagy. Sorry. So any of this supposed magic, right? People will cite that one study with the growth hormone response that it was 3 times. So there's 2 problems. That one study that was 3 days with no food. That wasn't an eating window. They literally took the food away from the people for 3 days. And growth hormone without the presence of insulin won't build any tissue per se. It's a carpenter with no wood.
Yeah.
Right. IGF is really what you're looking for, and that responds to insulin and glucose.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter if you had a bunch. And your pituitary is limited in what it can do anyway. Your pituitary on its own is not going to do what injecting growth hormone that a bodybuilder does.
Yeah, it's not going to mimic 18 units of Serostim. No. Once again, I think it's a tool. Like if you, it's just like keto. If keto helps you be more disciplined with your diet, then that result is probably going to be better. But there's no magic about it. At the end of the day, I think it's just net energy balance. I do like doing some fasting once in a while just for giving my gut a break. But if you like having muscle, and this is something that I hear from guys all the time. If you like muscle, growing muscle,
becomes
not eating, it's not a good way to do that.
There's nothing anabolic about fasting.
No.
I find carb cycling to be kind of a happy medium there, right? Because on your low days, which are typically your off days, at least for me, it kind of gives my gut a break because my calories are much lower. At least my carbohydrates are on that day. And you kind of have that sense of hunger and awareness that you get when you're not eating per se, but you're still eating something. So you're still supporting recovery and growth. You're not fully removing nutrients from your body.
Yep. All right, moving on to the next one. This is another one that sort of goes along with the intermittent fasting. I hear this one from people. I stopped eating late at night because eating late at night makes me fat. It's the same situation here.
Yeah. There is something to be said about food timing. Like you and I and what we do with our clients, there is an appropriate way to think to time food. That being said, millions of people have lost weight by not doing that. It's overall what matters the most is your total calories during the day or during the week, right? Your total protein, because you could say that about protein too. Like I like to consume protein before I go to bed. The studies don't show that it's necessarily doing anything outside of having an adequate amount of protein throughout the day. It just, for me, it's an easier way to stay full. But same with eating at night necessarily is not going to. It's the calories are the issue.
Yeah, the one more specifically I hear from people is not eating carbs late. There's no magic to not eating carbs. In fact, it probably is going to screw up your sleep.
Yeah, so carbohydrates tend to help serotonin release, which will help you go to sleep, right? And the human body doesn't really. We have a circadian rhythm, but the body's not so aware of the time per se. It doesn't understand that the sun's not up anymore. As far as like a food or an energy requirement is concerned, our ancestors weren't concerned when it was dark that we didn't eat. So it's not like all of a sudden, as soon as the sun goes down, you're all of a sudden going to store carbohydrates as body fat versus when the sun is up.
I find, in fact, that most people get their biggest food cravings at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will struggle with that. I'm one, like I'm always hungriest at night. I lift late, so I eat my largest meal before bed, usually. And that helps me, like, especially on contest prep, I'll eat my largest meal before bed. And that helps me get through. So clearly I can get down to 5% body fat eating before bed. So
I found for me, and there's some research to back it up too, for like I lift early in the morning. I'm up at 4:30. I'm eating by 5, probably in the gym by 6, maybe 6:30. So the nighttime is very far away from when I'm lifting. So I don't want my biggest meal late if I can avoid it. But I've found, and like I said, research backs it up to a large degree. If your meals early in the morning are much bigger, like if your breakfast is bigger, it tends to reduce cravings at night. So that's a technique people can use as well. People don't want to do that because most people try to avoid breakfast. But I've found with my clients, when they either skip breakfast altogether or their breakfast is very sparse, they tend to have a much bigger appetite at night.
Yeah, I never have an appetite in the morning. I'm the exact opposite. I have more of one at night. All right, so next one here. Fasted cardio burns more fat. That is technically true, but
doesn't mean more fat loss, though.
No, it doesn't equal more. And you can talk about this, Kurt, the difference between burning fat and losing fat.
So with the fasted cardio thing, there are studies to show that both are effective, right? I mean, this has been an argument forever. I would say if someone is natural, it's not a technique I would personally use outside of maybe walking. I think the stress response would be a little too great if you don't have some sort of anabolic protection in there that's going to protect your muscle. I think it seems like a silly idea to do fasted cardio from a muscle preservation point of view. Where people go wrong is the burning of fat versus the loss of fat, right? So when you eat a high fat diet, you tend to store more fat. You also tend to burn more fat. Your body will burn and store what you give it as the substrate. When you eat a hard carbohydrate diet or a low fat diet, you tend to store more carbohydrates as glycogen, and you tend to burn less fat, but you also tend to store less fat. What's actually going to cause the outcome of fat loss is your total calories in and out, right?
Yes.
If you're in a deficit, you tend to lose weight. If you're in an excess, you tend to gain weight. And the next question people will ask, not necessarily related to cardio, but I get this one all the time, and it doesn't pertain to that. So what then determines the weight that's lost? Is it fat or is it muscle? So really the main things that matter that we can control are lifting weights. If you give your body a reason to hold on to its muscle, which is mechanical tension, it tends to hold on to the muscle. And if your protein is high, right? So, somewhere between 0.8 grams per pound and 1.3, 1.4 grams per pound seems to be about adequate for most people. Your hormones matter, but generally only when they're super low or super high. Somewhere in the middle, if you're a natural person and you have a healthy level of testosterone, or a woman that a healthy level of progesterone, you most likely your hormones are not affecting the outcome. Same with thyroid. Thyroid disease is much more rare than people want to believe. It's generally not the issue when it comes to weight loss. It comes down to those other techniques. But fasted cardio, it's not, in the long run, it's not going to necessarily cause more weight loss than post-absorptive or post-meal. So if you were to eat breakfast and wait 3 hours and then do cardio, you would lose the same amount of body fat.
Yep. That seems to be the case. Now, with that said, I like doing my fasted cardio. So I get up and I do it and I enjoy doing it. it just makes me feel better. And it's probably from the cortisol, right?
Yeah.
You get some endorphins and whatnot. All right, the next one here, carbs, more specifically, sugar makes you fat.
Okay. So we'll make it really simple and we'll say, so all carbohydrates become glucose at some point, right?
Yep.
So whether you are consuming table sugar or you're consuming broccoli, it's going to be converted to glucose at some point. That's the outcome of carbohydrates. It's just at the rate in which it becomes glucose and where it's becoming glucose. If you were to eat dextrose powder, that is already glucose. And so it's glucose as soon as it enters your mouth, versus broccoli is going to take much longer to become that way. So the reason why we don't typically want to eat straight table sugar is because there's no actual nutrition in it outside of energy, right? So we would be consuming an adequate amount of calories, but we're not getting any vitamins or minerals. It's not that there's anything per se wrong with it. And a dentist would say you can rot your teeth.
AKA an empty calorie.
Yeah. So which is kind of a funny term, right? Because technically it's not empty. It still contains calories.
No, it's still
missing nutrition.
calories.
It's kind of a funny. So carbohydrates, and this has been known for over 100 years, carbohydrates' primary source, and you could look this up in many medical books, the primary way they're stored is in your liver and in your muscles as glycogen. That's where the majority of carbohydrates are stored. Only 1 to 2% of them will be stored as adipose tissue. We're talking about non-diabetic people. It's in order for them to be stored as fat, they have to then go back through your liver and be converted into the proper form to a triglyceride, and then they can be stored as fat. But that's not, you don't eat a potato and store it as body fat within an hour. That's never occurred.
No.
And it's not to say that you can't get fat from eating carbohydrates. I would never say that. Again, it's a calorie thing. But the amount of, let's say, pure carbohydrate, how we define carbohydrates, like rice, potato, oatmeal, right? Something that's an actual single source ingredient. The amount of white rice that you'd have to consume to store extra body fat would be a pretty phenomenal amount of rice.
Yeah.
Versus a dietary fat is already in the storage form and it's not necessarily used as immediate energy. That's not how it's designed. So it's much easier for your body to store that.
I also think a lot of foods that people label as carbs, like you see people eat a cookie and they call it carbs. They eat a candy bar, they call it carbs. It's when they eat pizza and they call it carbs. When you actually look at the caloric content of those things, probably half or more of the calories are actually coming from fat.
Yeah. And in that case, what is your body storing? It's most likely not storing the glucose from the cookie. It's most likely storing the partially hydrogenated oil that's in the cookie.
But we're going to beat this horse until it's dead. Once again, it's about net energy balance at the end of the day. I don't remember who it was. It was sort of a supersize me experiment, but this guy dieted on eating only candy bars and was at a net negative energy balance eating candy bars and lost weight eating only candy bars. Now, I don't know that your body composition would be the best.
No, nor would your health be. But it shows that they've done it with table sugar too. They had a group that literally ate the equivalent calories in actual table sugar, and they lost.
Well, that's another thing too that people get confused about. That your body doesn't just store energy as fats. So weight loss doesn't necessarily equal fat loss. So, I mean, technically muscle tissue is stored energy, right?
Yep.
Fat is stored energy. Glycogen is stored energy. So where you distribute your macros is going to probably have an impact on where your body pulls that energy from, correct?
Yeah. Well, like if you ate a diet of just being extreme, if you ate 2,000 calories a day of butter versus 2,000 calories a day of chicken, you would look entirely different.
Right.
But yet the calories are the same. So calories also are not everything. They do matter overall, how much is going in, how much is going out. But that's why you and I look more at the specific macro breakdown of the diet, not so much as the calories, right?
Right. Your body's going
1,800 calories doesn't.
Your body's going to start breaking down muscle tissue instead of.
Because your body, the human body runs on glucose as its primary source of energy.
Right.
And if you don't give it an adequate amount of glucose, so just your nervous system needs about 140, 150 grams of glucose a day. If you don't give it at least that, it's going to make that. That's why carbohydrates are not considered essential. It's not that they're not needed. You actually need glucose you'd be dead if you had no glucose. It's even in ketosis, your body's still making glucose. It's taking alanine from your muscles and making glucose. It's that's like a last case scenario before your body wants to die.
Right.
It's, you will make that glucose whether you give it to your body or not. And then on top of it, if you're someone who's lifting weights, you have a much higher need for carbohydrates than someone who's not lifting. You and I need to eat much more than, a sedentary person.
Yep. All right. Next one. This is one that also drives me nuts. There's some pseudoscience MDs out there that are shucking books, but the whole insulin makes you fat thing.
Okay. So again, trying to make it simple, insulin can with like an asterisk next to it, blunt the fat burning process, depending on how elevated and how long it's elevated for, because it's going to oppose catecholamines, but it's not going to be a strong enough response to actually stop fat loss. If that were the case, then bodybuilders would not be injecting insulin.
Right.
Like most pro bodybuilders, even when they go on stage, are probably using multiple types of insulin at that point, right? There's probably a long acting and a short acting in there.
Guilty as charged.
But so it's clearly that's not what's occurring. That the insulin model of obesity, as it's called, was disproven in the 1990s. So doctors that still preach that stuff are reading textbooks that are very old.
And they're trying to sell their books.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, people, that most people that come up with these off the wall diets and concepts for fat loss are just trying to sell you something.
Yeah. Now, insulin is important. Obviously, when you need insulin to live, you'd be dead. Just like without glucose, you'd be dead without insulin. I think where people get confused, insulin sensitivity matters. How well your body can secrete insulin in response to food, and then how well your cells can use that. You basically want to be very sensitive to insulin with your muscles, but you want to be very insensitive to insulin at your fat tissue. So just to say you're being sensitive to insulin in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean good. It depends on what tissues you're talking about. You don't want your fat to uptake glucose, and it typically should not be taking glucose. That's just not the way a non-diabetic's body works. 1 to 2% of glucose is stored inside fat cells as glucose. It's just not really a thing.
Well, the best way to improve insulin sensitivity is just to lift some weights.
Yep. And keep your body fat low. The higher your body fat is. And you and I have both seen that, right? As we let our composition go up, because you get out of shape in the off season, your insulin sensitivity slips. And that's why when you get past, for most men at least, when you get above 15% body fat, your insulin sensitivity is not fantastic anymore. And most of the weight you're going to gain at that point is not muscle. Muscle tissue. It's going to be fat. And that's why you and I also would both use with clients, we don't let their composition go that far in the off season because it's not advantageous.
Yep. 100%. All right. And the last one, we'll close on this one, Kurt. And this is what we've been preaching through the whole thing. There's a bunch of people, I've been running into them on social media, that tell me that the calorie in, calorie out model is outdated, that calories in, calories out, and that energy balance is not true.
Well, the problem is is it the second rule of thermodynamics?
First rule thermodynamics, right? Or is it second? I don't remember.
But if someone could figure out a way to disprove that, that would be pretty brilliant. But unfortunately, the body is.
Well, you could create limitless energy, solve the energy crisis, and go collect a Nobel Prize, be a billionaire.
Unfortunately, the calorie thing is true. It does come down to calories in and calories out. It is nuanced, like I said before, right? The macro breakdown, the specific breakdown of the food you're eating does affect your body composition. If you're just concerned with weight loss, irregardless of what that weight is coming from, just looking at the calories will work. Right. I've known plenty of people that were significantly overweight and they've just reduced their calories overall and they've lost weight. But then when it comes down to I don't know anyone who's gotten into the single digits of body fat by not looking at macros.
No,
I don't think that occurs. I know plenty of people that have gotten from very overweight or obese to 12 to 15%. They've gotten somewhere around average, what I would consider average healthy. But then the thought process needs to shift. But the calories are really what's going to drive weight loss. That's physics.
Well, I will tell you this. If calories in and calories out doesn't work, there are a lot of bodybuilders that want to know how you do it. It would make getting ready for shows a lot easier. Yep. But like you said, macros and how you choose what food you eat does make a difference. As we mentioned before, your body stores energy in different ways. So as a bodybuilder, we don't want to lose muscle tissue. We don't want to burn or break down muscle tissue, right? We want to keep glycogen as full as possible. We want to prioritize burning fat. So how we distribute our macros plays a role in that, correct?
Yep. And there's a thermic effect of food as well.
Yep.
Like protein, you lose almost 20% of it in
it's
digestion.
about 20%.
And you lose carbohydrates, you lose like about 10 in digestion, and dietary fat, you lose almost none.
Right. And I think people a lot of times get confused by the math. Like the human metabolism is very dynamic, and your body has survival mechanisms where it doesn't want to starve and die. So your metabolism will downregulate as you lower calories. It's not that calories in and calories out doesn't work. There's been some sort of metabolic adaptation.
That's it.
Or, so for example, eating high fiber foods, those never actually make it into your system.
Yeah.
Even though there are calories into them, there's nothing to be burned there.
Yeah. But we typically, at least I typically count them though, because it's not a perfect formula, right? So I'm going to count carbohydrates regardless of the fiber. I know a lot of diet products will say net carbs and things like that.
Yeah, net carbs. And
that's confusing. I just count the carbohydrates. I'm not going to count the net carbs because
I don't get overcomplicated.
And they also remove sugar, alcohols, and stuff, and that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, there's technically some calories in sugar, alcohols.
Yeah, there's 7 calories per gram. Yeah, just digested differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but and your biome in your stomach and all this stuff can affect absorption rates and things like that. But that doesn't change calories in and calories out. No. I've never seen a person who, if we're eating 150 grams of rice and we lower it down to 100, that they are not going to have some sort of corresponding weight loss to lowering of the food.
Absolutely. I mean, that's all I did for this. I just reduced my carbohydrate intake slightly. Right. That's all you need to do. You don't.
Now, everybody's different. Everybody's unique, but thermodynamics rules, calories in, calories out rules, net energy balance matters. There's no way around it if you want to lose fat. And losing fat is different than losing weight.
And most people also carry much more fat than they think they do. So
yeah.
It's a mind game as well.
If I had a nickel for every time somebody, it's almost every new coaching client I sign up, hey, here's my pictures. I think I'm around 15%. Like, nah.
Closer to 25 or 30.
No, not there, my friend. All right, Kurt, any parting words on food myths?
No, we keep them coming.
Diet myths.
I like these.
I like diet myths. This will piss some people off.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Folks. Thank you for watching. Go check out our Anabolics course if you want to learn something. Thank you.
Thank you.